Welcome everyone. Today we have our another new episode, and this is our 562 episode. We have our world famous speakers, Mr. Edward, Mr. David Smith, Mr. Donalds, and Mr. Jason. We will discuss on infectious disease. First, I would like to give chance, Mr. Edward.
Hi. Well, obviously, the last 2 years, infectious diseases have been on everybody's mind. If not infecting everybody, sadly, with COVID. I want to make a couple, maybe 3 points about infectious diseases. First of all, of course, by the way, I can't cure them. Okay, so just right off the bat, oops, looks like we're disappearing. Oh boy. Are we back? Okay. Well, I'll just say right off the bat, sadly, I can't cure them. Okay. So I want to get that straight. Okay. But
Hello. Hello.
Edward, we lost you.
I don't know if that's mine or yours, but
we can't hear you.
Okay. Was it just okay? Anyway, but I want to make a couple of points here. First of all, just remember. Is it just me going out? Well, let me try again. A couple of points. First of all,
Mr. Edward, please continue.
Are we having fun yet?
Okay. Now I would like to give, yes.
Okay. Okay, let me see if I can get this in before I go out again. I'm not sure why this is happening. With okay. Oh, sorry. I'll try to sign back on again, okay?
Okay, sure. Professor David Smith, what you want to add for today's discussion?
As Edward was beginning to head, we've all, with the pandemic and things, really understood infectious diseases too well. And with the monkey virus and others coming down, it looks like that's going to be around for a while. But infectious diseases is really disease such as influenza, malaria, meningitis, and others caused by the entrance into the body of pathological agents or microorganisms, such as bacteria, other viruses, fungi, whatever, which grow and multiply there really fast. And infectious diseases, I went back and pulled some stuff out from my time on the National Institute of Health, where the first known use of the term infectious disease was in the year 1600. So it's been around for a long, long time, and really has worked there. And many infectious diseases are normally very mild, harmless. Some infectious diseases can even be helpful because they increase the body's immune system and do other things like that. And infectious diseases have a lot of ways to be transmitted. They can pass from person to person or by insects, other animals. You can get an infectious disease by consuming contaminated food or water, or being exposed to different organisms in the environment. In Texas, with the warm weather, we can even get infectious diseases from just swimming sometimes in the hot water in ponds and lakes and stuff that are stagnant, where organisms will tend to stack up. The signs and symptoms of an infectious disease are manyfold, but often include fever, fatigue, and there's a wide range of them, that from very small impact to some that are life-threatening infections that need hospitalization. And many infectious diseases we begin to wipe out over the years by vaccines, such as measles and chickenpox. and others. But it really is one that has a wide range of impacts and is called to the front because of the type of pandemics we have seen, with the potentials for the ones coming up, and is one where we're beginning to use a lot of tools to begin to deal with it. One of the big advances in just actually the last couple of years has been the use of forecasting tools to begin to identify early some of the infection diseases, particularly new ones that are emerging, and to be able to plot and make adaptations to them. We see these tools used all the time, and it's something that as we go and talk further about this today, wearing my futures hat, I will come back and spend a little bit more emphasis there. But like I said, infectious diseases are not always all bad. Some of them actually are beneficial to us, and they tend to be the milder ones because they build up. But the good thing with the epidemic, though, around infectious diseases and viruses is that the awareness is much higher today. The CDC, the Center for Disease Control here in the United States, on the new monkey virus, the monkeypox, just issued a whole list of recommendations last week to try to get ahead of this infectious disease. And so we're doing more, trying to be more proactive. And I think we'll see that globally. So Sharif, I hope that helps gets us in there.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Donald, what you want to add? And if you give some present example and present statistic, what's happening, it will be helpful
Well,
for our
I
audience.
want to expand a little on what David said. There's different kind of levels. What we've been faced with recently is what everyone we've been talking about is we call a pandemic, and that, as you know, it doesn't happen a lot. And what that means is that we have an infection that's spreading globally. It's happening at the same time in a lot of different countries. Infectious diseases that are more ongoing problems are ones that we call endemic, which means that they're in a population on an ongoing basis. So some endemic diseases are cholera, malaria. Malaria really isn't a problem in the United States because we have very robust mosquito abatement. But in some countries, that's just not doable because the amount of surface area for mosquitoes to be able to breed is so high that it's not possible to be able to completely abate them. So malaria becomes endemic to an area. There's different kinds of organisms that, and David mentioned this, but I'll just kind of go back over it. There's bacteria, which are one-celled organisms that get into your body and multiply rapidly, as David said, and they start taking over some of your organs or other parts of your body. In some cases, your brain. They just, which is not too good. And those we basically kill with what are called antibiotics. So the one-celled organ, and so the first antibiotic that was widely used is penicillin, and that's an amazing drug. However, what happened, interestingly, and this is kind of a scary thing, and it's one of the challenges we face right now, is that by natural selection, that when we use an antibiotic, some of the bacteria are resistant to that antibiotic over a period of time. And those bacteria start thriving, and we wind up with what are called basically antibiotic-resistant bacteria. And that's happened. One of an endemic disease that's been a problem for many, many years in lots of places is tuberculosis. And tuberculosis was it's kind of an awful disease. Only a small percentage of the people who get it actually die of it. It's sort of a little bit like COVID was, because it can be sneaky, where people get it and they don't really have any symptoms, but then they go around and they give it to other people. And then some people get it and they get very terrible symptoms and die of it. The great kind of founder of country music, Jimmy Rogers, died of tuberculosis. There's quite a long list of very accomplished people in the world that have died of tuberculosis, and people are still dying of tuberculosis. And the reason is because the antibiotics that we've used to cure tuberculosis have become resistant to tuberculosis, and we can still give a combination of antibiotics that can usually work, but the disease is becoming resistant. New antibiotics are being developed, and I'm optimistic that we'll be able to deal with that problem. Okay, viruses get into your cellular mechanism. It's iffy. You wouldn't really call them alive exactly. And what they do is they get into your cells and they hijack your cells and reproduce themselves. And so some viruses that COVID is a virus, AIDS is a virus, smallpox is a virus, polio is a virus, measles is a virus, and the way your body deals with viruses is that your immune system learns to recognize cells that have been infected with the virus, and it kills those cells. And the consequence of it that you see when you have flu or cold, which are viruses, when you're coughing and you have a runny nose and stuff, that's dead cells being expelled from your body. It's kind of gross, but that's because your immune system is getting the attacking the cells and killing them. And so what we want to do is we want to develop ways of stimulating your immune system and having your immune system recognize cells that have been infected, and so that your immune system knows to recognize those cells and kill them, rather than have the cells be hijacked by this virus and have the virus take over the cells, because when the virus takes over the cells, they don't function the way they're supposed to in your body, and it causes your body to malfunction and can possibly kill you, which is not what you want. And so that's what vaccines do, is that they train your body to recognize some protein that's inside of the virus, so that when the virus attacks you, your body is already primed to recognize it and can attack the virus, and it can attack it either directly or kill those dead cells, or kill the cells that have it in it, which is what I mentioned. There's a couple of other. Malaria is actually a parasite, kind of. It's not exactly either one. And then there's funguses. We have West Nile virus in California. Sorry, that's a mosquito-borne disease. I was thinking of valley fever, which is a fungus. But we have these big, giant pandemics, and they're rarely. And how we're able to deal with them is complicated. And I think we all just lived through COVID, and we got to see people's resistance to vaccine. I've been in the Rotary Club. The Rotary Club was one of the main organizations that helped eradicate polio. It's not completely eradicated, There's a few places in the world where there's small pockets where polio still exists, but and it's because of the same thing with COVID. The people there have beliefs that the vaccine will make them sterile or somehow harm them, but it required huge, massive mobilization of people all over the world to inoculate children, and and because of that, we managed to eliminate a disease. Previously, there was a horrible disease called smallpox, which one of the strains of smallpox, it was hemorrhagic fever, which more similar to Ebola than it was to chickenpox, which meant that, you died bleeding through your eyes. It was not fun. And it killed much of the Native American population of the United States and people all over the world. And that was the first disease that we developed a vaccine for. And there was a vaccine all the way back in the Revolutionary War. They called it variolation then, and it was not. And actually, it helped us win the Revolutionary War because George Washington inoculated all the U.S. troops, the American troops. The United States was, I don't know if it exactly existed, and the English troops were not vaccinated. So the American troops didn't get smallpox, and the English troops did, and that was so. Finally, what I want to say is that when you're looking at infectious diseases, the real problem with them right now in the world is one of the main ways that they're spread is through poor hygiene, poor sanitation, and poor, and so diseases that cause diarrhea and other poor health problems in places where the water quality isn't good and health quality isn't good are usually diseases that are bacterial diseases. They can be cured with antibiotics, but if a country is lower stages of development, it may not have access to the medicines that it needs. And if it doesn't, and that can create a huge toll on the long-term health of the country. So the biggest cure for infectious diseases right now is helping the water quality and the sanitation in countries all over the world. So that's what I want to say right now.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Edward.
Oh, okay. Hang on. Okay. Hopefully I'm on now. There we go. Oh, good. Okay, excellent. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Thanks for those comments, Don. I'll say a couple of things. Obviously, when I started out, I was saying everyone is concerned about infectious diseases because of COVID. Though Don points out, of course, it's a much, much broader topic than COVID. But COVID has really raised a lot of questions. For example, even in the United States and developed countries, the question has become, well, for example, to what extent can you pass along the disease? To what extent can you get the disease? And for example, in the United States and elsewhere, obviously, the vaccines give you a lot of immunity against COVID, but not perfect immunity. And it gives you, and it basically prevents you from passing on COVID to other people, except that when there are breakthrough cases where in fact you have been vaccinated and you do get COVID, then it's possible for you to pass it on to others. But the other thing, of course, is that with vaccines, even if you get COVID, the symptoms tend to be a lot less. Now, a couple of things I want to mention. First of all, there's been a problem in the United States and elsewhere about politicizing discussions of COVID. And I'm going to get to a little broader point about infectious diseases in a second here. And this is unfortunate. I think one of the important things about all of these issues, whether you're talking about malaria, which, as Don points out, is really not a big problem in the United States. I'm sitting out by a little pond here. I can prevent malaria with my bug spray, make sure mosquitoes don't eat me. But one of the problems is that we need to be able to talk honestly and openly about these issues, and not to try to put it in just, well, either you're in this camp or in that camp, which unfortunately has happened in the United States. A lot of folks were saying, well, initially, vaccines are almost perfect and it's going to be great. But of course, we know they're not. Some say that there's no side effects. That was part of the narrative initially. But we know that for some people, a very limited number of people, there were side effects of certain of the vaccines. So I think it's important that we talk maturely about these issues. For example, now, by the way, there's a little antigen test thing, and you can see that this one is negative. That was done, I think. This one was for my wife. Now, all of us in my family have been vaccinated, and I've had my boosters, and my two 11-year-olds have both had theirs. And yet, a week or so ago, one of my daughters got COVID, and it was like a mild cold. The other daughter didn't get COVID, but the cold was really terrible. So you have to look at that issue. Another problem you've had with discussing the issue is, for example, about masks. And in this country, there was a lot of back and forth about whether masks work and to what extent. So, for example, you have different kinds of masks. See this little flimsy thing? Probably doesn't work much at all. I mean, yeah, if you're wearing this and you sneeze, at least you're not going to sneeze in someone's face, but it's not that effective. And then you have these cloth masks. See, I've got my customized cloth mask. Isn't that nice? But they don't tend to work. They work a little bit better than this thing, but not as good as others. And then you have the KN95 masks that tend to be pretty good. That's these kinds of masks. You see, they come in different colors, so I can match my shirt with one of these masks. Isn't that nice, right? But I'm kind of being a little flippant about this, but the point I'm making is that in our public discussions, we really need to be honest about these issues, not overstating that masks are going to be a miracle, because then when we discovered they weren't a miracle, well, should we trust the Centers for Disease Control in the United States to say anything valid? On the other hand, the people who say, well, vaccines are very, very dangerous. Well, they're not very, very dangerous. They can cause blood clots and some adverse effects in others, in certain people, very, very small number of people, but they're not. So what I'm arguing here is, in this case with COVID, but in all the other things that we're discussing, we have to speak maturely about it. Don brought up the issue of malaria. And this is something that, because I did a lot of development work in Africa, I saw the problems with malaria. Interestingly enough, back many decades ago, there was an international push to ban the insecticide DDT, based on some science that was not exactly strong, according to what it did with birds' eggs and things like that. The problem is several million deaths in Africa, mainly small children, have been attributed to the fact that they weren't able to reduce the population of disease-carrying mosquitoes. So again, even the discussion back then about malaria had been politicized, and it became a thing of, oh my gosh, DDT, it's an insecticide, it's terrible, everyone is going to drop dead if we use it. It's just not the case, and it wasn't the case. And in fact, there have been millions of deaths in Africa, mainly children, because they didn't use DDT. You see, you have to have that trade-off. Interestingly enough, right here in the United States, right here where I'm sitting, there is a controversy over spraying for mosquitoes. Now, when I was a little kid, communities would do that all the time when there was a big mosquito population, and to keep it down. And we have had cases, by the way, right where I'm at, about West Nile virus in birds and things like that. But again, because the issue becomes politicized and you don't look at the risks versus the benefits, you often get these problems with this. The final thing I'll say is that in many cases, certainly outside of the developed world. A lot of the issues are with things like basic sanitation and water supply, things of that sort are often the sources of the various infectious diseases that Don has mentioned. I'm sure David has mentioned a few of them as well. So my point here is, take precautions. Oh, the final thing I want to mention is you have to take account of economics. You probably remember, especially those of you listening in the Asia Pacific area, the protests in Melbourne, Australia, because the lockdowns seem so draconian that they're destroying lives, they're destroying economies, when at that point, the vaccines plus the masks, we're doing a pretty good job of keeping down the level of COVID. So again, you have to take that into account as well. You don't want to destroy the patient, kill the patient, so to speak, with the cure. And so that has become an issue in many areas. In the United States, fortunately, COVID levels are way, way down because most people, or 60, 70% of adults, have been vaccinated, as well as kids. And when people do get COVID, like my daughter did a week or two ago, it's fairly mild and there aren't really any adverse side effects that can be seen. So again, that's my point, is let's try to have a mature discussion about these issues. Let's try not to politicize it. There's no perfect answer to how you deal with these things, but this is absolutely crucial if we are to bring down the levels not only of COVID, but malaria and all the other things that we're talking about. Tuberculosis, as Don has pointed out, fortunately, that has been radically reduced over the years. So anyway, those are my thoughts on this subject.
Thank you, Mr. Edward. Mr. David Smith, very interesting discussion. Many important informations actually we are getting right now. What type of solution we have for solving this disease, and how these developed nations and developing nations can work closely to solve this kind of critical problem?
Sharif, great question, but let me restate one of the things you said a little bit different. Infectious disease is not a disease. Infectious diseases are made up of many different diseases. So there's many different approaches to going and trying to solve it. Now, let's just take a moment and talk about some of the most common infectious diseases, influenza A and B. And, we have a vaccine for that reformulated every year to try to head off the ones that have been forecasted are going to be the most dominant for the next year. So that's one way where we're using to control that infectious disease. One of the other types of infectious disease is strep bacteria, streptococcus, which is one which lives on your skin and can get into it. It's an infection disease that can be life-threatening. And with this one, you treat it with antibiotics. But some of them do not respond well to some of the, for example, penicillin antibiotics, and have begin to become antibiotic resistant. So that is another approach. A lot of the research right now is going into trying to find new antibiotics and variation of antibiotics that have different characteristics in it that can get around the strains of infectious diseases that are antibiotic explicit in there. E. coli is another infectious disease that lives in your gut, and sometimes those can be bad. I have seen with my son with an E. coli infection that knocked him down for a week and going those. And we talked a lot about COVID. When I was judging an innovation judge at South by Southwest a few months ago, I came down with COVID after that. And Edward, I wish mine had been as mild as your daughter's. Mine put me in bed for about a week. And but we all respond differently to diseases and things. So that's one of the key points here. Just let's touch on a couple of others. Herpes, simplex 1, simplex 2 are an infectious disease and can be impacted a lot. I mentioned some of the diseases that come out of infected pools and contaminated water and food. These happen all the time, particularly with children who are in daycare and other approaches like that. Many of the sexually transmitted diseases are infectious diseases. And there's many, many different ways to begin to treat those now. Salamania is an infectious disease that comes from raw or undercooked meat, eggs, poultry. So part of it there is look at how you prepare your food and how you put the pieces together. I could go on with the different types of disease classes that cause infectious disease, but Sharif, some of the common things is you need to be aware of your surrounding. You need to do some of the things like what Ed was talking about with looking at wearing masks where it's appropriate. You need to wash your hands often. You need to do some of the hygienes that we were taught back when we were little kids to help prevent the spread of disease, like when we were in school. Medical science is advancing, but as we advance with cures for infectious disease, many times the disease will mutate, it will morph. And some of the drugs that we've used to heal infectious diseases in the past are no longer applicable, are as strong as they were before, and we become resistant. So it's going to be a continuing battle to handle it. What we've seen with some of the swine flu, COVID, and others is that with the mobility of our populations today, it's very easy to spread infectious disease, which is something that was not as bad of a case a century ago. Yes, diseases spread then, but they were not the rampant disease spreading we've seen today. So again, hygiene's a great, look what you're doing, be conscious. I hate to say this because I really enjoy rare food and I enjoy my ceviche and my sushi and things, but you have to be careful with what you eat today. And those are some of the other elements. But infectious disease has one common thing, even though nations begin to control, like we did with tuberculosis, that has to be done globally. There's still parts of the world where it's hard to get a tuberculosis vaccine. There's places where you see that for other diseases too. So we need to work better on making sure that the cures we have for infectious disease are available globally. And I think that's one of the places where COVID has helped us and looked at how do we put a supply chain in place, a logistics in place to deal with infectious disease globally. So Sharif, I hope that answered.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Donald.
I want to point out that in the United States, when COVID first happened, there was a very large shortage of N95 masks and other masks for medical personnel, people who were doctors, nurses, ambulance drivers, all the kind of people. And it was not known scientifically whether or not it was going to help the average person and society in general if normal average people wore masks. And research was then done. And on the basis of the research, people realized that, yes, it was very valuable for the average person to wear masks. More masks were manufactured, and the CDC, which originally said, you don't need to wear masks. It's not necessarily, it's not necessary, changed their guidance and said, well, yes, no, masks are important and they're a very good idea. And what happened is a lot of people started saying, okay, they're waffling. They don't know what they're talking about. They're changing their minds. And there's organizations in the United States. The reason things get politicized is because people take advantage of things like that. And they say, aha, this is a chance for us to blame the current administration and the CDC and make them look bad, because if they look bad, then that's an advantage to our side. And there's a group of people inside the United States, especially, who have a ideological belief in basically individual freedom, laissez-faire economics, and what's called methodological individualism.
Yeah, they're called Americans.
It's basically a very flawed.
It's what the country was founded on.
Right, they have, which is that they.
And I'm
they
Just 1 minute, 1 minute. Dr. Talib, can you hear me? You want to say something? Sorry about that.
and so when things like this they come up, they'll take advantage of it, and they'll say, for instance, well, if you wear masks, your individual freedom is being you're losing your individual freedom. So they'll create these political problems.
Who was the president during the first year of COVID? Yeah.
Attacking the CDC is who was running the CDC. You're sitting here kibitzing, and I haven't done that to you, Edward. I will say that one of the most evil organizations that's ever existed in the United States is the Heritage Foundation, who you work for.
And I worked proudly for the Heritage Foundation for many, many years. It is one of the best organizations that I've ever worked for, and has done more for human progress with the Index of Economic Freedom.
Yes, Professor Donald, we cannot go for personal attack. I can understand, but today we are discussing about infection disease. This is our focus.
So stop jumping in there, Edward.
You're attacking me.
Yes, Professor Donald, please. This is my humble request. Better, we should not move with the organization.
So then stop with the whole thing about politicizing stuff, because the way things get politicized, the research about DDT is incredibly good. DDT was killing off birds. It's very well known. The research is absolutely excellent. It's
how many millions of children in Africa died?
It's one of those very complex issues.
Yes.
It's one of those very complex issues where we either have like no birds, whole species of birds die, or we have we're faced with lots and lots of complex issues with the environmental issue. It's not black and white. We're finding other solutions, like, for instance, there's a lot of different solutions that we're trying to find.
Yes.
We have to find alternate solutions. We can't eliminate.
After how many millions of children dying over the decades in Africa?
Professor
Okay.
Edward and Professor Donald. I come back to you.
I forget it. I'm not gonna go on this. I don't think I belong on this show today. So I'm gonna be quiet and listen to Edward's bullshit.
Okay. Professor Donald, just stop. I just want to give chance. Dr. Talib. Dr. Talib. He's also a political figure. He also worked for many important organizations. Dr. Talib, what you want to add for today's discussion when we discuss about disease, special infectious disease? Yeah.
Well, what I want to say is it's a political issue. Anyhow. How? So I'm not surprised that Donald and Edward are clashing. It's a political issue. The political parties are taking advantage of this, unfortunately. And they're doing their best to make the others look bad. This is very clear in the United States, very clear in other parts of the world. Now, what I want to say about infectious disease has nothing to do with politics. It's something to do with science. We need to be very logical about it. We have to be very logical about it. And what Mr. David said is very important. We need to stick to the hygienes and to the masks, because they are very, very effective. Now, what we need to do is look at some of the practices that the Chinese used to have before. In China, they used to wear masks even before there was a disease. When there was something called pollution in the air, they wore masks. In Korea, if you enter a home, you have to take off your shoes before you enter the home. These are going to be facts of life from now on. We're going to have to live with them. We have to live with them because the world is changing and the infectious disease has taken on a new dimension after COVID, particularly. Before that, it was Africa. Africa was suffering from infectious diseases and the inability of Africa to face it alone. Now it's the whole world, because COVID has made travel very important. We don't stop traveling because travel has spread diseases all over the world. Now, what do we do with that? We have to be very careful about traveling. We have to be very careful about how we live from now on. The COVID has uncovered many of our weaknesses. Some of our weaknesses are in the multilateral system. The multilateral system, as I said before, which have brought governments together. It's the responsibility of governments now. Governments are in charge of our health. And unfortunately, it's being politicized. And now we have a world divided into two. We have a world that's open up in Europe and the United States, and a world that's still closed up, like in China. China is politically not ready to take any chances, while the United States and Europe are taking much chances. Of course, it's understandable, because governments are in charge of health of people, and the health are very important. Life and death of people are very important. But you can't rule the world like that. It has to be scientifically based. Sorry, Donald and Edward. It cannot be a fight between two people or no organization.
Agreed.
I do want to say, to add to that, is that's exactly the point. And the question in China right now is, once you get COVID, you really, it causes permanent damage to you. And so I ask myself, in countries where everybody's getting COVID, there's a downstream issue with it, because many of the people who got COVID are going to wind up with problems in 10 years and 20 years. And so I wonder if China's asking themselves the question, can we really afford to have massive health problems in 20 years from, tens of millions of people in our country?
And Chinese don't take chances.
China's not taking a chance with that, and that might be the sensible thing to do. Like saying to yourself, "Oh well, it doesn't matter if half the country or 3/4 of the country get COVID." That's a pretty risky bet. And so, for personal freedom, I mean, I wear masks. You know, it's the right thing to do. I don't want other people to get sick. My wife got COVID because she's a medical personnel and she got it in the course of her work. Fortunately, she could take the antiviral immediately, like, the first day she got it. And she's been x-rayed and her lungs seem to be fine and everything. But it's a nasty, dangerous thing. So why don't we just cooperate with each other? Wearing a mask isn't freedom. It's a matter of health. It's science. We know it works.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Mr. Edward, I want to give chance. And
Actually, I don't know how much we disagree. What I started out by saying was that we have to look at the science. In this country, there are people who are called anti-vaxxers, okay? And they just basically say, well, vaccines just don't work very well and cause terrible side effects and so forth. The data does not show that.
It worked for me.
Yeah, the data does not. The data does not show that. Okay, the data shows that 90-some% of people who get vaccinated either don't get COVID, or if they get COVID, it's going to be a very mild case. And so those folks have been wrong. The folks who, who in many cases exaggerated some of the benefits were also wrong. What a mature discussion means, and maybe Donald and I actually agree on this, though I'm not going to ask him about this, is that science is uncertain, okay? We don't know. We get evidence and then we revise our understandings as we get more evidence in. Uncertainty is part of life, okay? And so what I have been doing, and by the way, I was literally at the Food and Drug Administration headquarters the last day of February in 2020, right before the COVID thing started. And I was complaining to them about some things that they were doing that were keeping test kits off the market and protection off the market and so forth. So I fought these battles literally in the halls of the Food and Drug Administration, okay? So I am in agreement, but you have to take into account all of these other factors. You have to take account of economic factors. And, every year I was just looking at the statistics here, and, in the last half century, I'm not sure if it's 100 million people have died from malaria or 75 million. I was just trying to get the numbers there. That's a lot of people, and most of them were children in Africa and in less developed areas. So here's something where you have to look, and this is a perfect example. DDT, you have to gauge 100 million or 75 million deaths versus, is it going to be worse than than using the DDT? And of course, I think the evidence is absolutely clear that those lives could have been saved, and that the downside would have been, not as terrible. So, but the point I will make is that I agree about the use of science. I agree about we have to have a mature discussion about these things. And look at all the sides, realize that there's uncertainty in any of these discussions, okay? But also take into account that you don't want to, for example, kill a whole economy and that sort of thing. If there are things you can do in terms of, for example, in this country, you had a very chaotic way that some businesses were open, some businesses were closed, and it really didn't make sense how the regulations were doing. And that rightly alienated a lot of people who were losing their jobs, who couldn't pay for anything. And so again, you have to look at these things maturely and understand that there are economic and other consequences that are very, very bad as well.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. I want to go for the concluding remarks. First, I want to give chance Mr. David Smith.
Sharif, thank you. As we can see, medicine is a subject with many different sides to it, many different elements on it. What I'd like to say is, I mentioned this earlier, is some of my time as we're beginning to looking at this, one of the keys I see in helping us, particularly with infectious diseases, is to look at a way to be able to forecast what's going to happen. There's a reason our cars have a bigger windshield in the front and usually a smaller windshield in the back. It's important to know where we've been, but it's even more important to know where we're going. and particularly when we're trying to deal with diseases on a national basis or a global basis. And so if I begin to look at infectious disease forecasting, what it does is it aims at synthesizing the epidemiological information related to the disease occurrence in advance, so that you can look at new formulations that might be necessary to treat the disease. So you can look in advance for better allocating appropriate public resources at appropriate places and appropriate times, and begin to look at it so that you can manage outbreaks through a workflow of looking through data, through analytics, and through communications. And if I go and use COVID as an example, and I hate using COVID as an example, those were the things that we saw happening as we began to forecast it. We came up with initial ways that proved wrong shortly after it was began to be spread across the world, with treating it, with preventing it. And we've learned from those as we go forward. So you see those and you see the changes. The truth, as Edward said, is that science is not always right. You know, humankind is an exploring nation, but for centuries and centuries, we thought a ship would fall off the side of the earth if we ventured out, and we proved that wrong. We began to see different ways of doing things, and we've grown and we advanced. And that's what's important as we look at our health systems and how we manage disease. We also know that diseases is different in different parts of the world, different parts of a country, based on what you eat, what the community is. You know, I was looking earlier at a survey that was done, and this was a survey in Seoul, and the citizens in Seoul picked infectious disease as their most dangerous health hazard, and fine dust actually came in as second on their survey, and climate change was third on their survey of what are the most serious health issues. So
What was second? What was second, David?
it was fine dust, so dust in the air.
Yeah.
And dust in the air actually can be related to disease spread too, because you pick it up and carry it. It's much like Dr. Talib, what you mentioned with taking shoes off when you come inside. There's things you can begin to do which will help mediate the spread of disease, which can help mediate the spread of infectious disease. And personally, I would rather do the things to help me be healthy than have to treat me after I'm sick. And I think that is advice I give to people who talk to me all the time. I take immune boosters and things to try to prevent me getting sick. I take vitamins, I take amino acids to help me try to prevent being sick. And for the most part, knock on wood, it's done pretty well. But we each need to take our own approach and going forward to it.
We lost you for a minute. We lost you for a minute.
And that's my concluding remarks really here, is that this is a complicated issue. And there is not one right approach to treating infectious disease. And there's many different. So, Sharif, that's my concluding remarks.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Donald, what's your concluding remarks?
Well, I really have to agree with what Dr. Talib said. I first want to clarify and make sure that everyone realizes that one of the key fundamental things in science is what's called fallibility. And the idea of fallibility is, in science, no matter what you know, no matter what we think we know, there's always a possibility that we'll invent new instruments and new theories and change what we know. And that was the thing with masks. I mean, at first we didn't know how effective masks were, and then we learned how effective they were, and we improved, and we started using them. We learned as we went along what things were more effective with COVID. Dr. Talib pointed out that it has to work at a government level. A government is not a concrete thing that you can see or touch. A government is a complex set of relations that we ourselves are even involved in. And society is a complex set of relations. And we do have a tendency to favor some relations over other relations, and sometimes that does separate us into different groups. But what we need to do in the case of infectious diseases is, by definition, they go from one person to another. So there's no way that we can deal with infectious diseases on our own. Certainly, what David said, by taking vitamins and exercising and doing the kind, having good hygiene and doing the kinds of things to protect ourselves as individuals can help. But infectious diseases infect. That's what their name is. They infect all of us, or potentially infect all of us. So in order for us to mitigate them, we have to work together. It's something that we have to do, and governments are a way that we developed so that we can do things collectively, so that we can work on things together. And so it's the governments that are going to be able to help make this better sanitation systems, to make better, and to work together to get people to wear masks. I think they're going back to masks in Santa Clara County now, because actually COVID isn't going away. It's the worst that it's ever been right now in California. And so we're needing to go back to mandatory masking inside. So and that the only way we can do that is a government level. And we have to cooperate. Like people cooperate in China and Japan and Finland and places like that. I think that, I don't know how to make that happen, but that's the basic thing that we need to do, is to follow the science, look at what works, modify it as we learn more, be fine that things that aren't set in stone. I think I'll kind of end with a quote that's attributed to Keynes, the economist, where he said, "When I get new facts, I change my view. What do you do, sir?" And I think that's what we need to do.
Thank you. Professor Edward.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just emphasize what I said earlier, because I've been in the middle of these fights right here in the United States and in Washington, D.C. is, in fact, the situation is uncertain. I've been the person who's both criticized the so-called anti-vaxxers and the folks who have put too much credibility in uncertainty, basically saying, well, we're certain about this when we really aren't. But again, I want to make by the way, one of the interesting things in this country is a lot of the so-called anti-vaxxers are Trump supporters. The person who was pushing the most for vaccines and for approval of vaccines was Donald Trump. I have issues with him, incidentally, and that's a whole different discussion I don't want to get into, but I know for a fact that he was the one pushing the FDA to approve things very quickly. But again, the broader point I will make is that we have to look at these issues in context. We have to look at, for example, I was just looking up the numbers. It's more like 150 million people in this century have died of malaria. That's the low number. And so you have to make these trade-offs. And I want to agree also with Donald and add something to what not Donald, sorry, but David, and add something to what David said about we try to keep healthy ourselves. We try to keep our immune systems healthy as well. I suspect that with the science moving ahead, the exponential science, we're going to be able, for example, to juice our immune systems very, very well, much better than we do now. And so we're going to be able to head off or reduce, let us say, the possibility of getting infections. Yes, we need the vaccines. Yes, we need to get rid of malaria. We've gotten rid of tuberculosis in most cases and so forth. But I think that future medicine is going to obviate a lot of the problems that we're discussing here today.
Thank you, sir. Okay, Dr. Talib Rafael, what's your concluding remarks
Thank
for
you.
today's session?
I want to emphasize what Donald said about science. Science can never be precise, but we have to follow up the sciences as we move along. When something new happens, we have to catch up with it. Because as David said, and Edward emphasized that as well, we have to take care of ourselves as individuals. But governments have to take the real blame on all of this. Because governments are not working together. They're not working alone to start with. We have two schools in this world today. One school believes in the herd immunity, and they're leaving everything as it is now. I just came from Europe. I was in Spain, and I saw how things are going there. And now, if you compare this to China, for example, or Japan, China in particular, you can find out that there are two different schools of looking at these things. Governments are dictating things on their own. And it's very important to recognize that this COVID has no borders. Therefore, it's important that governments work together to be able to allow people to move from one place to another with minimum infection. But that's not going to happen, obviously, because of political reasons. Donald Trump is one of them. I'm sorry, Edward. I know you have issues with Donald Trump, but he is part of the problem. The problem is that he does not recognize the fact that it's not individual freedom that matters. Here is the community freedom. It's the community that matters, not the individual freedom. Individuals can say whatever they want to say, but governments can do whatever they want to do. And I'm glad that, as Donald said, California, they're going back to the masks. Masks are very important. Now, they may not have the same effect as they wanted them to have initially. At the beginning, we had masks to prevent others from getting infected. Now we're having masks to prevent ourselves from getting infected. But masks are important. Thank you, Edward, for having your mask ready. I have it ready all the time. Have it ready with me. I've been one of the lucky ones. I've not been infected. Yes, Donald. Thank you so much. Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This is really great discussions, and I believe this kind of discussion will be helpful for all of us, especially our World Talent Economy Forum. We do more focus on developing nations. I want to share good news that in Malaysia, we are actually working with Malaysian government, and we are producing near about 100,000 drone pilot from the young communities, because you know that Malaysia, they heavily dependent on construction and plantations, and it's growing very fast, and drone is very helpful for them. Besides the cyber security, artificial intelligence, we are massively provide training in Malaysia. We need more of your support, all of our speaker support and guideline. In Singapore, we are actually developing futuristic leadership in institutions, and we are also getting a lot more support from them, and hopefully we can help them to grow the new generations. In Bangladesh, we are working with Energy Ministry. They have 55,000 employees, so we will train them, and they will engage with Industry 4.0. In India, we are engaged with 15 villages. We are developing startup villages, and through this process we can solve unemployment. Also, Rwanda, we are operating especially for women. We are providing training for women and entrepreneurs. So this is the way actually we are trying to engage with human being. We are trying to engage with young people. That is the objective of World Talent Economy Forum. We do not have enough fund. We do not have enough resources. We do not have actually nothing, but only because of good people, only because of good collaborations and good partnerships, I believe it's become a great example for Asia Pacific. That they believe that we can contribute. Yes, now step by step we have our own campus in different countries. We are getting support from different government agencies and corporations. We need more support. We have to remember 3 billion people, more than 3 billion people, they live in grassroots level. They live in remote area. It's 40% people live in remote area. It's huge. I know many largest company around the world has United Nations, many big organizations and NGO, government, they are working for that. But still, many things we have to do. So that's why I request all of the global communities, especially our speaker, those who have ability, we want to uplift this 3 billion people. We need help. We need to develop their healthcare, their educations, their housing. They need more of our support. So this kind of dialogue actually open our eyes. It helps to develop more strategy. But World Talent Economy Forum, as an individual, we have limited resources. But I believe the speakers like Dr. Talib Raphael, Dr. Edward, Mr. Donald, Mr. David Smith, and all of the famous people, those who join with us, if they support our projects, hopefully we can go for human progressions. And another thing is always people ask me that what you value. I always value human progressions. Always value human progression. I do not have, in fact, house, money savings, luxurious cars. But one thing I'm sure, me, my wife, my family, everyone want human progression. And I know those who join in World Talent Economy Forum, everyone want one thing, human progression. So with your support, hopefully we can solve many things. This is the starting, but I'm happy that more than millions of people we are working right now. We have 100 people, those who are supporting our team. We need speakers like you, but it's a huge, more than 3 billion people live in grassroots level. So we need to work for them. Thank you, Mr. David Smith, Mr. Donald, Professor Edward, Dr. Talib Raphael, for your continuous support for World Talent Economy Forum. Thank you. Bye-bye and take care.
Thank you, Sharif. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, my dear. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Bye. Bye.